Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to care for the earth in stewardship, that all may grow in harmony with the good. Thus do we covenant with one another.
Sometimes tradition and innovation are woven together and are present at the same time. The UU Ministers Association holds our annual Ministry Days conference just prior to General Assembly each June. The closing event of Ministry Days is called the Berry Street Address, so named because in 1820, the Reverend William Ellery Channing, who was then serving the Federal Street Unitarian Church of Boston, invited all Massachusetts ministers known to be liberal to meet in the vestry of his church, whose entrance was on Berry Street. There he gave an address about the state of ministry at that time and what he perceived was necessary for things to continue to grow and change. With more than 200 years of gathering, the Berry Street Address is the oldest lecture series on the North American continent. Tradition. Each year, the speakers are invited to share what they perceive to be needed for our ministries at that time. Innovation. This past June, we had the gift of hearing from our friend and colleague, the Reverend Michael Slack, who serves as the community minister for worship and pastoral care for BLUE, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. What would he say to all those gathered at the Portland, Oregon Convention Center? Well, he said a lot. Reverend Michael Slack said a lot that was poignant and powerful and prophetic. He said a lot about the gap between who we say we are as Unitarian Universalists and how we often show up and behave. And that too often it's people with marginalized identities who are hurt, who are disappointed, and who sometimes leave when they fall through that gap. Reverend Michael said, perhaps more than any other time, it is crucial that we go beyond the surface of what our Unitarian Universalism espouses to be on paper and into who it calls us to be within ourselves, in the communities we call home and are called to serve, and out in the world. For me, this brought to mind this congregation's bond of union. We say love is the spirit of this church. Is it really? If it is, how does that spirit of love show up? What does love look like when expressed through the whole diversity of those who are here? So I've been watching. Just this past week, I witnessed and heard stories of love showing up and being received through acts of care, presence, and attention. This week, I celebrate visits to a family with a young baby to offer some company and an extra pair of hands, rides to medical appointments, visits to a medical rehab center, sharing encouragement on the road to healing, hugs at a Wellspring class, connections made at last week's in-gathering service, beautiful conversations with leaders from the daytime and evening branches of the Women's Alliance, sharing arts and crafts and works of creativity, practical home support and care for those with changing physical needs, attending memorial services so that those who are grieving are not alone. notes and cards of care and support, teachers preparing lessons, honest conversations about covenanting and shared commitments around masking, volunteers tending to the church grounds, the choir's voices raised in song. All of these I interpreted as acts of love. Other people may interpret them differently. The meaning that we make of our own and others' actions is important and may not always agree. This morning, I want to share 3 stories with you. 3 stories of love as expressed through the lives of members of this congregation and shared with their permission. Now, it's really important to note that these are just 3 examples, because if I were to begin a complete list of those who volunteer with love and commitment, we would be here all day. Today, I share these 3. The first story starts in the late 1970s. David Wilkinson was in high school, and his parents, Jean and John, were very active here in this and in the community. When David attended services, he would watch Pat Fleming, who handled all the microphones and sound. He was intrigued with all the gizmos. Back then, the sound system was simple: a microphone at the pulpit and a lavalier mic with a cord. All sound was managed from inside the sound room. No little iPad. Pat trained David to use the system, and he became part of a team of 3 or 4 people who took turns on different Sundays. Over time, the other people moved away or developed other interests, but David continued out of his love of this congregation and a love of technology. In the late 1990s, the Great Hall's sound system had an overhaul and lots of new equipment was installed. There were a few people who learned how to use it, and it was exciting. They had a lot to learn and realized that they didn't have to do things the way that they had always been done. David has helped with sound for worship, weddings, and memorial services. He enjoyed working with new people and getting to know the sound needs of different ministers and worship leaders. He liked the challenge and getting to orient people to a very complex system. When he's running sound, David hopes to make things appear seamless and flawless. No one really notices unless there's a mistake or something goes wrong. And of course, because human beings and technology are involved, it is rarely seamless and flawless. And even when there are glitches, he knows that he is supporting a congregation that he loves. UUSS is a place he's always felt close to and that matters to him, and he wants to see things go well. I'm grateful to Pat Fleming, who taught David how to run sound here over 40 years ago. And now we're grateful that David is willing to pass on what he knows and loves to a whole new group of people. Thank you, David. This, yeah, I'm seeing woohoo, yay. The second story weaves together 2 lines in the bond of union. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. These lines are both important to Kendra Pratt, who organized the volunteers who prepared and served monthly lunches at the soup kitchen for 13 years. Kendra and her husband, David, are traveling. They are making up for several years of not traveling, and they couldn't be here today. So we send lots of love to them on their adventures. Now, I know that lots of us might feel good when we do service and justice work. We want all people to have a safe place to live and the food that they need to eat. We want equity in healthcare and education. We want to protect the earth and not have greed rule the day. We want fair elections where all who are eligible can vote freely. We want to stop racism, homophobia, transphobia, and more. And while some of us may show up to help to make those things happen, there aren't many who want to organize stuff. So when Kendra Pratt offered to organize the volunteers, that could have been an act of love. Over those 13 years, Kendra and the Soup Kitchen crew served meals to hundreds of people. Kendra loves the people that she volunteered with and cares for those in the community who are hungry. Later this year, she and David will be moving to Saratoga Springs. And she said that she will miss this congregation very much, and that they have always found friends and community in the congregation nearest them. Here at UU Schenectady, as we move more fully into a shared focus with our social justice work, we have the opportunity to make an even bigger impact in the wider world. Right now, with UU the Vote, more than 100 people are already participating and finding a way to be part of advocacy, witness, service, education, community organizing, or leadership development, all focused on voting rights and access. There's a way to be involved that fits for you. There are so many ways for our love to be expressed. And we know that in today's economy, that there are many of us who are having trouble buying groceries and paying the bills. If you're struggling financially, please come and talk with me or with Reverend Wendy. The Congregation and Community Fund has resources in it for such hard times. Thanks to those who have contributed to make it so. While it can be an act of love to be generous, it is also an act of love and trust to ask for help. Our third story is about someone who grew up in this congregation and who's experienced and expressed love here in many different ways. Randy Jennings' parents and grandparents were members here. His family had a farm, and so some Sundays found them here in church, and some Sundays found them in the fields. No matter what, for 58 years, this has been his community and spiritual home. Randy connects easily with teenagers and has worked with youth in a variety of settings, often outdoors. When his kids were young, he offered to help drive on outings with the youth group and to lead kayak and canoe trips. He was a great sub and occasional volunteer. And then in 1999, Randy was asked to join the youth advisors as another adult was needed for the youth program. Randy said yes and loved the interest, the energy, the intentions, and the possibilities of youth work. In the spring of '07, Randy helped organize a youth service trip to New Orleans to help with the cleanup and rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina. The first trip included folks from UUSS as well as 3 other congregations, filling 3 vans that drove to New Orleans together. That was the first of many service learning trips. Over the years, Randy and members of the youth group attended and hosted lots and lots of youth cons. Imagine lots of youth and very little sleep. He helped bring youth to district and regional events and twice to General Assembly. Over the years, Randy was part of creating a lot of covenants with all those different youth. He values the process of covenanting with input and commitment with everyone in the community or group to find ways to bring their best selves for work, play, worship, or whatever the activity may be. Our covenants can make room and a container for when something challenging happens. When conflicts would happen, because they do, he would ask, did we miss something in the covenant? Or how do we find ways to bring everyone back into covenant? Sometimes those processes take time. Reverend Gretchen Haley writes, covenant is a vision that says we are most human when we bind ourselves in relationship, but not just any relationship, relationships of trust, mutual accountability, and continual return. This is not what our culture teaches us, she continues. Our culture teaches us that what it means to be human is to be an individual, self-defined, self-determined, separate even. But our UU covenantal theology affirms that being human comes down to the commitments we make to and with each other, the relationships we keep. Randy's love for this congregation extends to the buildings. Well, he works to keep the physical spaces safe, warm, and inviting. As he said, the uniqueness of our physical spaces is worth caring for. And what happens in these spaces is so important. The celebrations, the connections, the space for grief, for worship, and for learning. This congregation has been a community for his family for generations, and it is an act of love to care for the spaces that echo with their memories. So let's celebrate the ways that love shows up. If someone here has made a difference in your life or inspired you, let them know. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to all who share love. Now, when we say love is the spirit of this church, it's important to remember that those words were not written about this congregation. James Vila Blake was a Unitarian minister who graduated from Harvard Divinity School in 1866. Originally, he wrote, "Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another." His words have been shared and adapted and spoken in many congregations. But as Reverend Michael Slack noted, having words written down or saying them does not make them true. We know that there are folks who have come here seeking a caring community and not found it, or not found a way in. We know that people here have been hurt. We know that there are folks who don't want to tend to the community. Living by covenants can be hard work and also so beautiful. We know that many of us are afraid of changes, afraid of loss. But dear people, the possibilities are quite amazing. Love is the spirit of this church. What if we lived as though that were true? What if we lived as though love moved through us just like our breath? Not to be grasped or held or collected or measured, but given and received freely. May we each know deep in our bones that just by being human, we are worthy and capable of love. May we each find meaningful ways to share that love, to live our covenants within our families, in the communities we call home, and out in the world. May it be so. Amen. Salam, shalom, ashe, aho, namaste, and blessed be.